of this. And I will pass it on to Carolyn.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Lush. I am a planner with Smith Group, one of the sub-consultants. And I'll give it to Lillian.
Hello, everyone. Lillian Webb with the Ride and Get Downtown program. I will pass it to Ken.
Hi, I'm Ken Anderson, and I work with the planning department at the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority. Is Devin the last one?
I think so. Hey, everyone. I think I arrived on this committee via the A2 Equitable Engagement Steering Committee. So, hello. And I think that was it.
Great. Well, thank you everybody again for that quick round of introductions and again for your time this evening. So you are in luck. You have a twofer this evening. So we are going to start off the evening with Sam Schwartz and AECOM and Smith Group talking about the work that you're familiar with related to Vision Zero, quick builds, the speed management, and then maybe even some messaging and outreach materials. And then when we get through that material, we'll transition over to the Michigan Fitness Foundation, where they'll talk about that follow-up from our last meeting, which you may recall there was the PED Education Safety Outreach Campaign that's based on this data set that they're looking at across several Michigan communities, and we were chosen as one of them. So we'll get an update from them in the latter half of the meeting. So the other thing, I'll just make a note to any of our attendees who are not panelists. These are fairly loosey-goosey meetings. So if you have a question, feel free to use the raise hand icon on screen, and then we can, promote you to ask your question to do it that way. We probably won't be formal, public comment periods before at the end of the meeting. But if there's something that comes up throughout the meeting, we can do that. And then another quick little disclaimer, I think all of you saw it when we were doing introductions. One of us hit the record button. That's really just to keep a second record of this meeting, but also a little cautionary tale. Watch your tongue because it's recorded and it will live forever on the interwebs. So no F-bombs. If you could, please refrain from those. All right, so on that weird note, Stacy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. And you gave an abbreviated version, I think, of the meeting norms that we typically go through. I don't know if you want to run through any more of these, Raymond.
Yeah, just kind of golden rule stuff, treat everyone the way you want to be treated. Just, respect each other's opinions. We're all adults here. Let's just act like it. So this is a good group we have here. It hasn't been a problem. So I suspect we'll be in good company, not a problem.
Oops. Great. Yeah, and it's not the first time we've met. So these guidelines are familiar to you all. So what we have for you to go over tonight for that first half of the meeting, we already did welcome and introductions, so we're well on our way. We are kind of in the middle of a lot of the different pieces of this. So a lot of this is going to be an update and not like a final report out by any means. But it's a good time for us to get some gut reactions from you and some feedback. So as Raymond said, this is pretty informal. I'm trying to build in some discussion throughout, so don't be shy about giving your input throughout. So first, we're going to give you an update on where we are with the 5-year action plan, and then I do want to talk about how we are working through where we are on tracking the plan and setting the city up for continual tracking and reporting. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we can do that in a sustainable way, because we don't want to make it too cumbersome that it doesn't happen. And then talk through where we are with the speed management program and next steps for that. And then finally, the pedestrian safety messaging that we've been vetting. And I did build in public comment period. I wasn't sure if that should happen at the end of our piece or the last half of it, so we can just skip through that. So an update on timeline, we are delayed. Has taken a little longer than we originally anticipated, but we are still hoping to complete our work by the end of the year. And so what we're looking at here, we're in mid-August with our third committee meeting, and I'm anticipating another one probably early November, the exact time and date to be determined. We are planning some public engagement activities in the fall, possibly continuing on beyond what I'm showing here. The communications strategy is ongoing. FY 2022 project identification is done. That's why you don't see a bar. And that is what led to those quick build installation locations and the designs that we've already delivered. One quick update on that. I don't know if Suzanne or Raymond wants to chime in, but materials have been ordered and we are anticipating installation of those probably late September.
Yeah, Stacy, I think you're right. Last night at City Council, they awarded the pavement marking contract, which, as you know, and you've heard us report, that's half of the work. And then the other part is the vertical devices. That order was placed yesterday as well. So we've lined it up, and then we just have to kind of coordinate those materials and installations so that it all kind of fits together nicely. So yeah, we're hoping about a month out, maybe 6 weeks, depending upon, you know, whose schedule we're beholden to the most.
And this number 2 here for public engagement activities, that is representing a series of walkthroughs that we have anticipated after those installations go in. So that is contingent on that timeline for the installations. And then what we're working on now, and we'll continue to work on through the fall, is the implementation program. And also continuing with the speed management program. They're going hand in hand here. And so we're starting to get to the point where those are lining up, and we'll complement each other. And then finally, the action plan and annual report as well by late fall into December. So that's what we're looking at for timeline. Now, we spoke last time about the 5-year action items. This slide might look familiar. This is just an overview of what was in the plan in terms of like the different types of strategies that were listed. 51 out of the 76 strategies were slated to be started in the near term. That doesn't mean they need to be complete in the near term, but at least started. And they fall into several different types of programs. We're going to mainly be talking about the capital investments right now. But then I also want to point out there's some ongoing programs that will kind of fill in some of the gaps, so to speak, where there isn't like a specific project that we're talking about here. So the annual sidewalk gap infill, like that's one of the strategies, and that's just something that is kind of continuing. It's an ongoing program, as well as curb ramps and streetlights. So again, this is a slide from last time. I just wanted to remind you the exercise that we did with you all to help us identify what the priorities should be for the different types of investments. So we took your input and met with the city again and sorted through how we should attribute weights to these different types of treatments, and how they, for each corridor and each corridor segment, if it had that type of treatment in the plan, then it would get a certain weighting. So we have a spreadsheet with every single major corridor that is slated for any of the either safety improvements or a bikeway upgrade or a new bikeway or a crosswalk. All of that went into this one long list. And then we tried to sort through based on the need and how we prioritize the need. When should those projects happen, but not just the need. So first we did the need and determined, what are the most important needs, but then also what are the opportunities that we have. And so that what factored into that was the feasibility, if the city has ownership over the road or not, that was a major factor. The opportunity to incorporate into an existing project or a anticipated project based on pavement condition. If it was a project that tackled more than one opportunity, and if it was a project that is going through an area in greater need, so factoring in equity. So that was all taking your input from last time and sorting through how do we assign priorities to these different corridors. So instead of overwhelming you with just a long list, what I thought would be most helpful is if I pull out the top 5 and you see 2 different lists that look exactly the same. And that was because I wasn't sure they were going to look exactly the same, but they do. So what we came up with so far, and I'll say so far because this is still a work in progress, something that we can still tweak. But these are the top 5 corridor projects that came out of that process. So Plymouth Road, Packard, Eisenhower, Miller, another segment of Packard, because we tried to break these corridors down into reasonable project lengths and division. And I put an asterisk there because I know there's a project on division. Our corridor segment wasn't the exact same length as that project. So I left that on there. So I wanted to pause here and just hear if you guys had any reactions to these, if these seem appropriate as top priorities, if you are surprised by something on this list, or if you're surprised by something that's not on this list.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was trying to do this in my head and I pulled up a map, but I was trying to visualize if we're improving access and safety for kind of the 4 quadrants of the city, like how do you think spatially this serves the city?
That's a good question. We haven't layered that onto it. So that's something that we can do next.
At first glance, it looks like you're touching quite a bit of it.
Yeah. So are we being geographically kind of equitable? It's a good question to layer on there. Lillian?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand for the top 5 proposed bike routes. Does this mean like on the street or just improvements in general? Could you explain a little bit more about proposed?
So these are streets that that are part of the proposed bike network from the Moving Together plan, but the design of those bike routes has not been determined yet.
And maybe Stacy, if I may add a additional line.
You're hard to hear, Raymond.
Oh, sorry. In addition to that, we may have bike facilities on these roadways already, but I think the idea is to make them in all ages, upgrade them to all ages. Is that right?
Yeah, in some cases it is an upgrade, in other cases it is a new facility. Any other thoughts or questions or suggestions?
And maybe Stacy, if you could also just, since the top 5 are the same across both, if you could maybe differentiate what the work might be between the list on the left versus the list on the right. I think you just touched on the list on the right, saying it might be putting in a bike facility where one doesn't exist and or upgrading an existing facility, whereas the list on the left is more about safety improvements, right?
Yeah. So right. So the first, let me go back. The focus corridor, so these happen to be one and the same, but there might be some corridors that we have on the longer list that are not slated to be part of the bike network, but they were identified because it's a safety issue or there was a crossing. I don't know if it's just a crossing, it probably wouldn't make it on this list because we're looking corridor wide, but so it might be on just the list for safety improvements, or it might be on just a list for adding a bike route, or it might cover both. And it probably makes a lot of sense that the first round of highest priority routes are covering both, because these are 2 big priorities for the city to address safety and build out the bike network. So it does make sense that they're aligned in this case. And then a next step, I just flashed on the screen for a second here, was this is a concept drawing that was from Moving Together. This is not newly created and certainly would need to be vetted with the community and engineered more. But one thing that we'll be looking at moving forward is like, what do we think, what kind of investment is needed here? And so that's where we'll determine, Lillian, to your question, like, is this looking like it's most likely going to be a striped bike facility or an off-street bike facility? And even that exercise will be preliminary. We're not going to get to the point of drawing up concept plans for each of these projects. But since we've drawn some already, I thought it might be worth bringing these back to the forefront and giving you guys a visualization of what a next step might be. So we had done a visualization for Plymouth and for Miller. It also, I think, demonstrates 2 different scales of investment, where Miller, is a pretty constrained right of way, and there are already striped bike lanes out there. We do want to do things to make it more safe for everybody using the road. And but there might be fewer options that we have than for, say, Plymouth, where in this case we're showing the potential for an off-street shared bike path, or shared use path, I should say. So the scale of investment is going to vary quite a bit, and I am saying that in part as a caveat to kind of jumping around here, but here we have a very high level cost estimate for these projects, and that is going to need to be fine-tuned once the city is like looking at what specifically should happen on that street. But at a very, very high level, we're just trying to get a sense of what's the scale of investment. So taking a step back, looking at that long list of corridors that we had, and then applying the prioritization. So the long list is like the 20-year list, right? And so the reason we're doing this prioritization process is to get it down to what should the city focus on in the next 5 years. So what our spreadsheet spit out based on the prioritization was, these are just some metrics that we would be tackling: roughly 13 miles of tier 1 corridor, 10.5 miles of tier 2 corridor, 14 focus intersections, 6 new crossings, 23 miles of bike routes, and 66 bike intersections would be addressed through that preliminary list of projects. And then on the right here, what I'm showing is what was set forth as a target in moving together. So we hadn't specified any specific mileage for the tier 1, tier 2 corridors, so there's not a direct comparison there, but we did identify that 15 focus intersections should be addressed within those 5 years, 3 new pedestrian crossings, and 65 miles of bike routes and 20 bike intersections. So I put these in red because they're a little bit off of what we're seeing come out of that potential 5-year list. Now, this isn't to say that this is the only way to get projects. I think one thing to point out is that, you know, bike routes might be handled also through pavement resurfacing, and we don't have to tick all those 65 miles off by investing in this really big corridor study. So this is like kind of a check for us. You know, like once we get this 5-year list, are we on track to meet these targets that we are set forth in the plan? I know it's a lot to take in, but any questions? Larry?
Yeah, a question about corridors, for example, on Plymouth, which is an important corridor, to make that really usable, there's some issues that beyond the stretch that you talked about. You said Murphin to 23, but really the stretch from Broadway Bridge to Murphin is an issue. The bike path on the side there is in poor shape on the outbound side, and the issue of how to get over the Broadway Bridge and connect to that is something that needs to be looked at to make it usable. You can get through there, but it's far from ideal. I wondered, does it make sense to extend the range of that, even though some of those issues might take longer to resolve?
Yeah, that's a really great point, and I think maybe that's probably a good next step for us. So we've broken these down into reasonably sized chunks, but that doesn't mean that a bigger project can't be handled at once. And so one step that our team can take is, you know, the next segment of Plymouth is on that list still. It's just further down on the list. And so the question might become for the city, is this something we want to tackle all at once from US 23 all the way, you know, down into downtown, or do we want to tackle it in 2 chunks, 3 chunks? You know, how do we want to segment that?
And really, from a user standpoint, this is all an extension of the cycle track on Division now, because if you're going out of town on Division, you need to, there's some gaps there to get to the Broadway Bridge, and then how to cross the bridge on the side or on the bike lane, and then how do you get to the path along Plymouth, then how do you get to the existing bike lane and or path on the side of Plymouth. So yeah, from a user standpoint, it's kind of a whole, looking at the whole corridor, but I realize you need to kind of prioritize the segments of that.
And one of the things we always try to look at too, and Larry, I appreciate the comment, is we always try to look for connections, right? So sometimes the segmentation is a function of, you know, how far can we get to connect one facility to another facility. So, you know, sometimes a scan such as this is a good starting point for the discussion, but then reevaluating those endpoints to make sure there's a logical connection to existing bike facility is another good point. So yeah, points well taken. I think it's definitely something to you know, look at those limits and see if they should be tweaked. The other thing that I will note, Stacy, if you could go back to the projected cost, I'm sure many of you appreciate that we don't necessarily have $43 million programmed for these improvements, but the good news is some of these we can piggyback off of existing projects. So in 2024, for example, there is a project on Miller. We just had a meeting Amber organized a nice bike ride. Was that just yesterday? Felt like a week ago, but where we kind of went around and looked at some of these facilities and what some of those opportunities are. So some of the, while we don't have $43 million laying around, I think there are some existing capital projects that we can leverage. There is the ARPA money, the American Rescue Plan Act funding. We have about $2 million. And we might be seeking some federal discretionary grant funding as well that can supplement this. So we are being pretty aggressive at trying to unlock some funding to get this done.
All right, I guess before I move on, any other thoughts or questions about the project prioritization? All right. So I'm putting the prompt here at the front. I want you all to be thinking about what should be included in an annual report. And again, keep in mind, not just like what is ideal and how much information can we get out to the public, but from a capacity perspective, keep in mind what the city will be able to report on year after year. And how can we get the most impactful information out on a regular basis to track the success of the plan. So what I have on the next several slides is directly from the plan. This is nothing new here except for some new metrics here on the first slide. We have the metrics broken out by value. So I'm just going to flip through quickly and then I'm going to take a step back. So we have a set of metrics for safety, for mobility, for accessibility for all, healthy people, sustainable places, and regional connectivity. And these are at the plan level. So we have these metrics set out for how do we know that we're actually like achieving what we wanted to achieve. And so it's a little bit different than this is an example of the metrics and the targets that are set forth for the strategies. And on this level, it's more about, are we doing what we said we would do in terms of, we said we would put in 50 curb extensions in 5 years. Have we done that? So that's tracking at the strategy level. And then the plan level is, okay, we put in 50 curb extensions. Did that have the impact we wanted it to have on safety? So not all of these are trackable on an annual basis, so that makes it a little bit easier to think through what should be included in an annual report. But I wanted to hear from you all what you think is most important for the residents and citizens of Ann Arbor to hear about in order to, kind of keep in touch with the plan and keep tabs on the city and the progress. It doesn't have to be like calling out specific line items here, but is it more about safety? Is it more about accessibility? Is it about a specific type of action versus the outcomes? Maybe starting with that last question, maybe that's an easier way to start thinking about it, is should the city be reporting on, I think it is important to kind of take a victory lap, so to speak, or demonstrate what is being done. and the progress being made in terms of the actions that have been taken. So I think on some level, reporting on the strategy level of here's what we said we'd do, here's what we're doing, combined with the outcomes from at very minimum, the safety perspective. Sorry, Devin, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm kind of combining two hats as I think about this here. One is having written a lot of annual reports and served as a consultant, and then the other is just having knocked on a lot of doors across the city of Ann Arbor. So having said that, one thing that comes to mind, especially since this is kind of year one, this is kind of an initial period, right, is a certain level of popping the hood and just showing how, how the work has transpired over year one, literally from like a committee, showing somehow how the sausage gets made, because we know there's a very small percentage of people who are actually dialed in on this stuff, but the ones who are dialed in are like dialed in, checking the I's and the T's, right? So, this is how the work transpired. I think that's really important. I think we're a visual culture, so I think documenting this work as it's happening with really good photography and stuff like that is absolutely critical, to demonstrate. A lot of people don't see these things when they're happening. And then thirdly, one of the things I've often advised people to be really careful with, and I don't have an easy solution for you here, maybe somebody else will, is something called the volume narrative. Like that's something that always comes up, predominantly in the nonprofit world, but in these annual reports, and it means a lot of figures. And most people don't know how to translate figures. Like they don't know what that is in relation to. So some of these here, some of these things you're showing, there is a baseline, et cetera, but you might, I don't know if there's industry kind of like, if there's actual tangible anchor numbers you can point to across the country that other communities are aspiring. I don't know what that is, but making those numbers something that are easily relatable and translatable, or else, people either nod politely or they give you grief because they don't know how to translate those numbers. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thanks. Julie, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think the safety information is absolutely critical for demonstrating the success of the project, but it's frustrating that it's such a lagging measure. And it feels like it doesn't really help it doesn't give us our victory lap. So, I guess my question is there any way to get safety measures that are more current? I think not, given how long it takes to generate them, but that would be helpful if it were possible.
That's a good thought. Amber?
Thanks. I agree with what both Devin and Julie said. I think both the actions and the metrics are important, but we need to streamline it and make it easier for people to understand. I also wonder if there's a way to humanize some of this, like some testimonials from, people's neighbors and residents of Ann Arbor about how their lives have been changed or impacted might also help.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And maybe as we do those walkthroughs after the quick builds are in place, we could get some of those testimonials. Seth?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that. I mean, I agree that the safety numbers are important, but they're also, I don't know, they're sort of a low bar. As in, I mean, it's great that we don't want people killed and injured, but they don't really, it doesn't measure places where it's so unappealing to walk that you're not going to have incidents because no one's going to walk there. So maybe some sort of citywide survey where you can ask people like, where do you want to walk and bike but are unable to, and see if that, as we make these improvements, like, oh, now I can finally get across Stadium Road and get to this store or this school. I mean, which is sort of along the testimonials line, but maybe if there's a way to put that into numbers via some sort of a survey.
Great, that's a good suggestion. thank you. These are great feedback, and I know this is a hard thing to just react to. Feel free to message Suzanne or myself or anyone on the team if you think about other things after this meeting as well. And I think what we can do on our end is outline an annual report in advance of the next meeting, and you guys can have something more tangible to react to and see if we're on the right track. Seth, I assume your hand is just still up, or did you have something else? Okay. I am checking the time. I think that I am almost up. So I'm gonna move us along here. I think I do have a lot of slides here, but I don't think we need to go through them all. We have a lot of slides because I have one for each tool, but I think you all are very familiar with the tools that we're talking about. So I'll just start with a high level update. We had talked previously about trying to match the tools with different types of streets, and that we were trying to categorize the streets by character. And that proved a little bit more difficult than we were hoping. So we're kind of taking that up a level and focusing on the criteria of a street, and is a certain tool applicable to that street based on that criteria. And I know that I have a lot of words on the slides this time, but we are working on bringing this all together into a map and making it visual, not just for you all, but for all residents to look through. So what we'll be able to do is you'll be able to click on a street and see what types of tools are applicable for that street based on these criteria that are here on the right. And we've done some testing of like different types of streets. There are quite a few different types of tools available for all different streets in Ann Arbor. Each one is still going to have to be vetted, and while it might look like it's applicable on paper, we're going to have to look at each individual case. And when I say we, I mean the city, as these pop up as resident requests or safety needs pop up, they're still going to have to be engineered and vetted. But we are also building in, how the timeline of implementation for each of these types of tools. So could a tool be done right away through a quick build? Could it be done in the near midterm because it's just a retrofit, or does it need a whole reconstruction of a street? So I'm gonna just flip through the types of tools that the tools specifically that we have. This is the type of information that is gonna go online. And for you to kind of click through on a map to see which tool is applicable on which street. So we have horizontal deflection type of tools. We have cross-section modifications, meaning changing the configuration of the street. Oops. Vertical deflection, so that's like speed humps, and some traffic control type of tools. So this is called a chicane. Is anybody already familiar with a chicane? This one is, I see some heads nodding. This one is a little bit less common, so might be new to some folks. It's basically like a bump out followed by another bump out or median that forces a car to drive in an S curve. I had a meeting recently and somebody was like, oh yeah, I watch Formula One. I'm all about chicanes. So same kind of strategy. It's there to slow you down by introducing an S curve. So this is kind of the same type of thing, but happens at an intersection. Traffic circles, I'm sure you're familiar with, and I'm noticing the time. So I'm just gonna flip through these real quick. We'll send around these slides to the whole committee. So if you do have questions about any of these tools, you can feel free to reach out and ask. Lane reductions, on-street parking, adding bike lanes or protected bike lanes, narrowing the lanes, curb extensions. I know you're all familiar with those. Chokers, where you pair curb extensions on either side. Raised median, pedestrian island, street trees, speed humps, speed cushions, which are similar to speed humps but have some gaps that are easier for larger vehicles. Speed tables and raised intersections. Pardon center lines, which you'll see and I guess have probably seen around town. Raised crosswalks. Speed feedback signs. Pavement legends. Street art. Pavement materials. So those are the tools that we're looking for that will be built into this speed management program. We're working on pairing the tools with the street with the baseline eligibility and building out a process where residents can provide input and requests. And then we'll be taking that whole process and program out to the public this fall. Suzanne, should I cut this last section? Okay. Sorry to not get through everything, but this was great discussion. I was not sure I'd be able to fill all 45 minutes, but it's helpful to get your feedback. So thank you all very much.
Stacey, if we could just take a moment, I do have a few attendees on the call. If any of those attendees wish to make any sort of public comment, now would be a really good time in the meeting to do so. Because what we're going to do is we'll transition from the Sam Schwartz team over to the Michigan Fitness Foundation team in just a moment. So the focus will shift a little bit, but I'll still be focused on transportation safety. So, and as a reminder for the 4 folks, the attendees that are online, if you could just raise your hand in the Zoom function at the bottom of the screen, there's a little raise hand icon. If you hit that, if you wish to speak, go ahead and do so, and then I'll promote you to speak if you'd like. And does the committee, while we see if any questions come up, does the committee have any other follow-up questions for Stacey and the team? One other thing I'll note is we are trying to socialize some of the concepts that Stacey just ran through relatively quickly with, different folks to make sure that we put out a toolkit that is amenable to, like emergency responders, I see Ken on the line, the ride. We want to make sure that, we don't put something out there that's not agreeable or hampers operations to such a degree that we can't put them in. So, I say that just to say that some of these may change a little bit in flavor as we move forward, but so far we've been having some really positive discussions, and it's more about the context and how they're applied and where seems to be more the consideration than taking things completely off the table. All right, I'm not hearing any other questions. I'm filling this dead space. So any other questions for Stacey? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you, Stacey and Sarah and Carolyn and Sid. Forgetting anyone else from the consulting team? No, I think that's all there. Obviously, you all are welcome to stay if you want to listen to some of the discussion related to the Michigan Fitness Foundation work. But Mary, I'm happy to turn it over to you. And Mary, if there's anyone else on your team that is not yet a panelist that I should promote, I will make you a co-host. So if you need to share your screen, you can do so. Please let me know and I can.
Sure. Thanks so much. That was really interesting information, and it's also interesting how our all of the work of this committee is dovetailing and supporting each other in one way or another. My name is Mary, and I am the only one here tonight from our team. So I am it, and I will be sharing my screen in just a few minutes. My name is Mary Mumaw. I am the Director of Safe Routes to School at the Michigan Fitness Foundation, and also the lead project manager on a pedestrian safety education campaign that is being done. We're piloting it in Southeast Michigan, and Ann Arbor is one of the communities that has been selected to participate. And they have graciously agreed to join the team. Many of you I recognize from the July 11th meeting. I think it was July 11th that we last met, and we presented crash data specific to Ann Arbor that is going to help inform a customized campaign for the Ann Arbor area. And when I say campaign, we're talking about an education campaign. This is not related to infrastructure. This is a media education campaign. The campaign itself has yet to be determined what that is going to look like. We're using research specific to Ann Arbor, and this is a follow-up conversation that we're having right now. So the first thing that I'm going to do is share some of the additional comments that came our way after the last meeting. And then we are also going to look at some of the draft questions on a baseline survey around pedestrian safety that we are going to unveil, which will be another step that will provide not only baseline information about what people who from the Ann Arbor area who complete the survey, what they currently know about pedestrian safety, but we're also going to gather some other information that will help us build the campaign so that it is customized to the Ann Arbor community. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to share my screen. And you should be seeing it's just a Word document that says feedback following the July 11th meeting where we discussed Ann Arbor crash data. There's about 7 or 8 points that I wanted to follow up with this group on. So, and these comments are nearly verbatim as they came to me or to Suzanne Flowers after the meeting. And I just want to go through them and tell you kind of where we are on this additional feedback that we got. So one of the first questions was the seriousness of the crash related to the vehicle's center of gravity. The question was, did we look at that in the information that we presented last time? And that is not something that was looked at. That could be something if this group thinks that that is an important thing for us to look at as we determine the messaging in the campaign. That would just mean us doing some research, a little more specific, looking at crash reports. So that there is potential that we gather some additional information about that. There was a question about us and how we're engaging with folks that have disabilities, a person with a disability, whether it be the driver or the pedestrian. This particular person has a particular concern as to how The roads may put lives of people with disabilities at risk when they're crossing roads. And while I can say we are definitely paying attention to people with disabilities and accessibility of the campaign itself, the structure of the roads and how the roads are built is not something that is going to be part of this campaign. So, so I guess the answer to this question that came our way is yes and no. Yes, we're definitely paying attention to accessibility and the disability community, but we will not be restructuring roads in any way. We again are focusing this project on the campaign and education campaign, not changing the infrastructure. The next one, it was a comment that we educate, that the campaign itself, here bullet 3, is including information about Ann Arbor's specific crosswalk laws, because they are different than the statewide laws. There was concern that because this campaign is happening in 2 other communities in Southeast Michigan as well, it's happening in Detroit and Monroe. This person wanted to make sure that the campaign happening in Ann Arbor is specific to Ann Arbor. And I can tell you that, yes, that is exactly what will be happening. So that if there is a part of the campaign that focuses on crosswalks, it will be specific to crosswalks in Ann Arbor and the laws that impact that. And we will actually revisit this topic again when we look at the baseline survey. The 4th bullet, data presented should be in a communicate that combats the misperception that pedestrian injuries are the fault of reckless or inattentive pedestrians rather than drivers' failure to yield. And yes, the campaign will focus on both driver behavior and pedestrian behavior. So we realize that it's not only one or the other, that it is a mutual thing. You'll see a question on this too in the baseline survey that we're talking about after this, because we're looking for what is the perception that the community has right now. You'll see a question about that. The next person said they suspect that enforcement of laws pertaining to pedestrian safety can be an effective means of education, and hope that that will be included in the current efforts. That is still being determined, how much enforcement will be a part of the campaign, and this committee can definitely impact that. How much we want enforcement to be a part of this pedestrian safety campaign when it happens. There's also somebody had an interest in the differences in crash at intersections with traffic lights versus 4-way stops. So they were interested in more data on this. I don't have an answer to this one. We are looking into that. And again, this committee can help determine whether that is something we want to pay specific attention to in the campaign, and what the crash data is showing us about that. That would involve some additional research on our part. And then I don't know if those who were at the last meeting remember that there was a stat presented that at intersections that have transit stops, there is a 5 times more likely, it was 5 times more likely that there could be some kind of a crash. So pedestrian injury could result. So we have had some initial meetings with MDOT, who has people who specialize in transit. We will also be talking to the folks in Ann Arbor. We also realize in Ann Arbor that in addition to traditional public transportation or transit, there is university transportation as well that plays a role. So this is something that definitely will bear more conversation. So that was the additional feedback we got after the presentation of the data at the July 11th meeting. I want to now open the conversation up to the committee for any thoughts and feelings about any of these. And again, Larry?
Yeah.
I'm not sure who, yeah, thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, regarding early education, when I took driver training many years ago, I don't recall anything about crosswalks or obligation to stop at a crosswalk. Has that been corrected in driver training materials? Because the young drivers especially should be educated about that.
Actually, that is a good question. I am going to add that to the crosswalk information. Early education for young drivers. Okay. Thank you, Larry. Other thoughts from the group? I'm curious to know if there are any of these things that committee members feel are a must, or maybe not as important as others. And I know you were hit with a lot of information at one time. So I don't want you to think that today is the only chance you'll have to offer your thoughts about this. You can communicate with Suzanne on any of these topics as well. And she and I communicate on a regular basis. So go ahead, Ken.
So trying to think about how to phrase this do we have any feeling for these, if you take into account maybe places where they've been implemented elsewhere, any approaches that have been found to be more effective than others? I know that's kind of turning that back on staff and saying, what do you guys help us prioritize? But it kind of feels like if there are a couple things on this list that just don't work in other communities, maybe we should deprioritize them a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good observation and question, Ken. We being Tool Design, who is the group who presented the data at the last meeting, they are currently researching campaigns based on the crash data results. And they will make recommendations, as will Good Marketing, which is the marketing firm who is going to be putting the campaign together. So they will be looking at other campaigns, and if effectiveness results are available, we will certainly be studying those. Again, specific to the Ann Arbor crash data and these other comments that came up at the last meeting along with these, for sure. Yeah, Larry, go ahead.
regarding crash analysis, I know that there's a police report that's written out, but has there been any organized analysis of what happened in some of these bike or pedestrian crashes? Because sometimes we've had questions about what really happened there. Is there any, and an effort to collate that in some way that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a real, thanks for that question. And that is a difficult thing to ascertain, because we do rely on the crash data reports. And what has been found to be effective in other campaigns of this type when they're using the crash data is actually pulling some of those reports and looking beyond some of the very specific things that get reported on all of the crash reports. The other things that officers who are filling out the crash reports, what they actually write in addition to the boxes that they check. So that is part of what we're still talking about, and why we're asking some of these questions to find out what are those additional things that we want to look at if they are available.
And that would help if there are patterns, then that would help in devising countermeasures.
Absolutely, absolutely. Amber.
Yeah, I don't have really specific feedback formulated quite yet, but just reinforcing what Ken was saying about effectiveness, because I wouldn't want you all to spend a lot of time chasing data that doesn't kind of meet the end goal. I think like the first question on this list, that seems like an interesting data point, but I wonder how that helps to inform kind of a local safety campaign.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing. There is a lot of information out there that could be very interesting, and we could end up going down rabbit holes, and we don't really want to do that. Mm-hmm. It sure would be interesting to know all of these things, and so we will have to pick and choose which ones we really want to focus on. Yeah. All right. So just know that if you do have additional thoughts, I know I often have thoughts after I leave a meeting, just know that we are open to your thoughts. So please, if you have them, please share them with Suzanne Flowers, and she will make sure it gets shared with the team. So thank you for your information here. So I'm actually going to close out of this document. And by the way, both of these documents Suzanne has in a PDF format, so that you can, if you're interested in having them, they'll either be on the website or on the or available to be emailed to you. So I'm going to, again, start sharing my screen again, and we're going to be looking at a baseline survey. This is draft. You're looking at it again, a Word version of a draft survey. And this again, is something that we're wanting to get out into the community. Based on your feedback, we will determine whether it's going to be online only, if we're going to have hard copies available, and exactly how it will get disseminated is still being determined. But we want your input on the contents of the survey. And as you see here, as we're sharing, as I shared this screen, we have this little intro. We like people to know how many questions there are and how long it will take to complete the survey. We are checking right now the allowability of purchasing some gift cards to incentivize people to complete this survey. And we talk about who are the sponsors of the survey. There are a few, I'm not going to go through all 28 questions, but there are some of the content questions that we really want your feedback on. So we have some screening questions about, you know, are you from Michigan? What's your zip code? How old are you? And whether they are a pedestrian, a car drive, do they take public transportation? And for those of you who are familiar with surveys and how they're put together, there will be some what's called skip logic put into this. So based on how you answer certain questions, you will get forwarded to appropriate questions. The reasons why people travel are going to be important to us. So we'll be looking at, are they commuting to work, to school? Is it social? Are you running errands, fun or exercise or other? And whether they are a pedestrian, a driver, or someone who uses public transportation, they will answer the questions accordingly. And by the way, just because I'm not focusing on these questions in our conversation tonight, that doesn't mean you can't go back and look at it and offer all kinds of feedback, because we are open to it. But in the essence of time, we don't want to go word for word through all 28 questions. But these are the questions that we are interested in seeing, and recognizing that you're not seeing this how it would look on a survey. We're just looking at the content of the questions. So we want to know what people, both pedestrians and drivers in Ann Arbor, think about the level of agreement about whether Ann Arbor feels safe or dangerous if you're a pedestrian, and whether drivers in Ann Arbor treat pedestrians with respect, and whether they follow the rules of the road. We're just asking for people's opinions at this point. We're using this as baseline, and these are some of the things that we are hoping to improve or change, depending on how they come out, as part of the campaign. And I am going to just pause here at question 8. Does anyone have any thoughts about this that they want to share right away? Okay, I'm gonna go pretty quickly through, so feel free to raise your hand and pop in at any time.
Mary, I'll
yes.
just let everyone know that I will be sending out these the 2 PDFs that Mary talked about this evening tomorrow. They will also get posted on the website, and we'll make sure that everyone knows the kind of time frame for responding if you'd like to. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Suzanne, you may notice that I've highlighted a few things, and there have already been a few, so I'll send you an updated PDF on this survey tonight. Okay, so this is again the question about traffic laws and pedestrian around pedestrian safety and crosswalks. So this we want to know what people know about the crosswalk laws in Ann Arbor. And I have the marked crosswalk and crosswalk highlighted here just because I did want to call the attention to the fact that we are talking about, we may be talking about both. And would this be too confusing for people as if they receive this survey? So 9 through 12, those are questions specifically about the crosswalk. And then question 13 is about speed, because we know for sure that speed is a factor in crashes that involve serious injury and death among pedestrians. So that's why that question's there as well. This next question is perception of responsibility in crashes. Again, we're looking for what folks, what their opinions currently are. This will be a sliding scale where the question is, who is more responsible for traffic safety? And people will just be sharing their opinions here. Okay, I'm keeping an eye to see if any hands get raised as I'm going. So, so the next two questions focus on the perceptions of behaviors relating, maybe not necessarily related to contribute to pedestrian crashes, but this is how can drivers and pedestrians change their own behaviors to increase pedestrian safety. So the question 15 is around driver behaviors. Question 16 is about pedestrian behaviors. And as I was looking at this, my brain is thinking about, are these the right things that we're asking? Do we have enough options here? Are there other things that we should be thinking about as we look at these questions? And so that's the feedback that we're really interested in getting from this group before this becomes a final survey. When we were talking about this with one of the other communities, this question number 3, or excuse me, bullet number 3 under 15, the question was why are we calling out left turns in here and not all turns, or why isn't there a left turn and a right turn? The answer to that is because there are more accidents when drivers or crashes when drivers are making left turns. And so that is why, but we are actually we actually had quite a conversation about whether we should have that broken out more. Julie.
Yeah, I just had a quick comment that the driver behavior seem to me to be things that are completely under the driver's control. But the pedestrian behaviors are more interactive. So it requires cooperation of the drivers so that you can't make eye contact with someone who isn't looking at you. And you can signal someone, but if they don't see you signaling, it has no impact. You know, so I wonder if you could focus on crossing with the light seems clearly something that's under the pedestrian's control, or maybe only crossing inside the crosswalk, not outside a crosswalk. Those things are under the pedestrian's control, but not all of these things are.
Yeah, good point. Lily, I'm sorry, is Lillian? Lillian, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of second what you were saying, Mary. That did catch my eye about the left turns, and I was kind of doing the thought process in my head about the pros and cons. I get why left turns might be particularly prominent, but I also see some value in turning in general, even if right turns kind of have maybe more near misses and full on situations. just in personal experience, even if making a right turn, it seems like folks may think it's a lot easier to just make that quick turn and suddenly realize, oh, there's somebody there. Let me either make a wider turn than they originally planned to, or some opportunities for near misses versus head-ons.
Right, right. Thank you for that. Yeah. Question number 17, self-reported unsafe behavior. So this is asking people to self-report. And we know that self-reporting is always an interesting thing in a survey when you're asking for folks to report on their behavior. In the past week, how frequently did you, as a driver, fail to stop or yield, as a driver driven over the speed limit, as a pedestrian not use a crosswalk or walk against a walk signal? I'm really curious, what are your feelings about asking a question like this and whether we will get beneficial information? Go ahead, Ken.
I work on other surveys, kind of onboard buses and then general ones that go out into the community. And this makes me a little nervous. A lot of people just don't, they want to make themselves look better, even though there's no actual audience at the time. So I'm a little bit skeptical of whether this is a good question, but I'm very open to hearing what your experience has been with this type of thing in the past and how you feel the data that came out of it is.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Julie?
Yeah, so I don't have a problem with self-report data. I think it's, somewhat useful, but I'm worried about the way this is formulated in the past week. How frequently did you? Because people's base rates are going to differ a lot in how much they've driven and how much they've been a pedestrian. And so something more like, maybe a longer period of time and what proportion of the time that you were that you drive around town, or that I don't know. It's really difficult, cumbersome to phrase it properly, but I think that
might be worth that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Seth, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Julie. I think a more general time frame, or like usually framing of that. But the thing, and I have no problem with self-reporting. And I mean, maybe people aren't being completely honest, and maybe they are. But what I would love to see is a follow-up question to those, which is why? Because I think that would be some interesting information.
Yeah, we could definitely add comment boxes on a few of these, and people could decide if they want to provide additional information or not. Larry?
The way this is framed, it suggests that there's something wrong with crossing outside of a crosswalk or against a walk signal. I do that all the time if there's no traffic. So it's really a question of doing it safely. So I don't know if maybe this should be framed in a way that doesn't suggest there's something wrong with that. And it's certainly legal to cross, a pedestrian can cross any street anytime.
Yeah, and Mary, maybe for some additional context, if you aren't aware, the city does not have like a jaywalk law. And I won't get into the history of that terminology, but I'll just use it because it's common nomenclature. But pedestrians are allowed to cross anywhere in Ann Arbor as long as, if they are crossing outside of a designated pedestrian crossing area, they are not to impede traffic. I think that's how the local ordinance is written. But beyond that, we obviously encourage people to cross at crosswalks because we put in safety measures oftentimes, and it gives the pedestrian the right of way in those locations. But like Larry's correct to point out that.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you. Thank you. Amber, Larry, were you done? Okay, Amber.
Just following up what Larry was saying, I was struggling a little bit that we're grouping all of these together because the risk to others from this driver behavior is really significant, but the risk to others from the pedestrian behavior is not. So maybe it's breaking them into two separate questions.
Yeah. Thank you. And Lillian.
Yeah, two questions. Will the title self-reported unsafe behavior be visible to them? Because I think that matters too, and how this is.
Yeah, we will, there will be titles in there. Let me say the questions will be grouped. Whether these end up being the final titles is not determined yet. So what are you saying, that take the self-reported out and just make it a question?
Well, if it's unsafe behavior, then I think it does have kind of this negative, clearly negative aspect. And then the other question I had was, will there be contact information, or is this anonymous? Because I think that would also impact people's willingness to answer truthfully if you also have their email and you're the City of Ann Arbor and Michigan Department of Transportation getting this information.
Yeah, at the bottom of the survey, if there is going to be any kind of incentive to complete the survey, we do ask for a name and email address, etc. So you're right. So we would need to address that. Okay, got it. And then the other thing that we are going to ask about.
Oh, Mary, I think
yes.
Seth had a quick question.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, no problem. It's just a quick follow-up with the title. I just wondering if you just called it self-reported behavior, because I'd be willing to bet a lot of people do things on both sides of that they wouldn't consider unsafe. So
good point. Yep. Good point. All right. And then the last thing that we want to look at is we're asking them to identify if they have heard any advertising or received any education, etc., on any of these, and it's a long list of things. Everything from bicyclists should use lights when riding at night, to drivers should follow traffic signals, posted speed limits. I mean, it's a wide range of things. And again, this is collecting baseline data that will relate specifically to what they learned from the campaign. So this survey will be done. This is the baseline. We will do the campaign. We'll do the survey again. We'll tweak the campaign, do it again, and then do the survey one more time. So this will track what they're seeing and learning from the survey and where they did it. And then we're going to gather some demographic information. And again, if we can do a gift card with some of our grant funds, we will do that to incentivize the campaign. As Suzanne said, I will get her a clean copy of this that she can send out to y'all tomorrow, and then we'll talk about a time frame to have any additional feedback back to me. But thanks so much for what you gave us today, and we look forward to moving forward. Larry, I see you have another comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, I noticed in one of the earlier questions, you didn't ask about whether people typically bicycle, and I assume that was intentional, but it might be interesting to correlate people's answers to this with whether they're bicyclists or not.
You know what? Thank you for bringing that up, because we got feedback on that from another community, and we'll likely be adding bicycling. Even though the follow-up questions will be focused on pedestrians, but we will want to know. I do know how to spell bicycle. All right. Thanks, Larry. That's it. Suzanne, I'm going to turn it back over to you or to whoever is, maybe Raymond, you're up. I'm done. Thank you. I'm sharing my screen.
Well, thank you, Mary. This is very informative, and we appreciate, engaging this committee in this way and helping kind of
Happy to be here.
project in a really good way. So this is great. And as Suzanne mentioned, she'll share this information tomorrow with everybody. So you have some chance to digest it, and then you can probably circulate those comments back through Suzanne, and we'll get those over to Mary. I do want to take a quick moment again just to open the floor to public comment. We still have a couple attendees on the line, so if anybody who's not a panelist is joining and would like to say a few words, feel free to raise your hand using the raise hand icon in Zoom at the bottom center of the page, and then we can unmute you to do that. While we wait to see if any public attendees are wanting to make any comments, let me turn it back over to the committee and see if anyone has any closing thoughts or anything that they'd like to share before we break. Julie, please.
Just a really quick question for Mary. Have you thought about how you're going to distribute this survey or make people aware of it?
Yeah, we're looking at some best practices, first of all, and then if anyone on the committee has specific thoughts, we would love to hear your thoughts about the best groups, the best methods, what works in Ann Arbor. So we are definitely going to be looking at dissemination. It has not been finalized at this point. But there will definitely be an online link, and whether we go with a hard copy availability for someone to print and submit, we will definitely be looking at that as well.
And maybe if we could shamelessly plug Suzanne while we have a moment still, what's happening on Thursday?
Okay, so we are I am hosting my first bicycling event Thursday from 6 to 9. This is kind of a joint effort through the Michigan APBP chapter, the city of Ann Arbor, to celebrate our gold level bicycle designation for the city. So if you are interested in participating or sharing the word, I do know that several organizations have been great about sharing that, and I'm super thankful for that. So we're going to meet at Argo Park at 6 p.m. We have a couple planned stops along the route so that we can learn about some of the improvements that took place in the partnerships that happened. Amber Miller will be one of our guest speakers along the route, so we're very thankful to have her involved. And we will end at Hanover Square Park for some games, refreshments, and some bike swag. So I'm still hoping that my stickers, my kind of reflective stickers, will be in my mailbox tomorrow, because I'd love to be able to hand those out. They look like they're really fun, and I really want to pass those out. But please join us. And again, thank you for those of you who have already spread the word. I do sincerely appreciate that effort. Thanks, Raymond.
All right, so I know we are at time, a couple minutes over, so thank you again. If this meeting wasn't virtual, maybe we would have had food for you. But hey, we're stuck with what we got, so we're virtual, and thank you for giving up your dinner time to be with us. Hopefully none of you are hangry. Again, I do want to thank you all for your participation, for the feedback that you've given us. We are listening. We are trying to incorporate as much of it into both of these initiatives to the maximum extent possible. And I think it's just headed in a really positive direction thanks to the input you're providing. So with that, I'd like to just break and say thank you again for everybody's attention to this matter and for your input. All right, have a good night, everybody.